mitigation, it's a designed driveway into the site. So it does comprise a road, it provides intermittent copse planting, it allows for woodland planting in the northwestern corner of the site, and it allows for the growth and supplementary planting along the western site boundary.
Yep. Right, would you like to turn back to your summary, please, paragraph 11.2?
And that's 11.2.
And I think that, Madam, it's just there was a note on the screen saying the recording has started, so I think we are now being recorded. Thank you very much. Yeah, 11.2, landscape effects.
Okay. The appeal scheme would be well integrated into the local landscape and would conserve the key characteristics of the Cadby to Adwick limestone plateau LCA, landscape character area. Careful consideration has been given to the location and design of the proposed building in terms of its form, materials, colours and textures. It would achieve a comfortable landscape fit due to its location at a relatively low level in the landscape, with surrounding land rising up to the west, north and east, and at a location alongside Stane Hill Plantation. This visually attractive building and associated memorial gardens would provide a positive contribution to the local landscape. It would be perceived as a new incidental landscape feature forming part of the dispersed pattern of buildings in the wider landscape. The appeal scheme would conserve the rural character and scenic beauty of the local landscape.
Thank you. Just pausing there, can you turn to 8.6.2 where you deal with the Cadby to Adwick limestone plateau LCA?
Yes.
And is there anything you want to add to what you've just said about that?
Well, I think the points I make in 8.62 is the degree to which the appeal scheme would, the views of the character of the landscape would be conserved due to the enclosure provided by intervening landform, plantations and tree belts. And then I go on to point out reference the 2010 capacity study, pointing out that in terms of the sensitivity, visual sensitivity of a potential allocation for housing, that would be that was identified as a medium sensitivity. And I'm pointing out that the crematorium has been sensitively located at a low level in the landscape and on a site that benefits from this high degree of visual enclosure. I then go on to point out there will be glimpse views of the access road, but this new low-key feature would be set within a corridor of land defined by native tree groups, field boundary hedgerows and grassland. The final point there is that roads and farm access tracks enclosed by trim field boundaries are common features in the study area.
Thank you very much. Back to your summary, 11.2.2.
The landscape design proposals are of high quality and would contribute to a strong sense of place for the proposed crematorium. Existing peripheral hedgerows would be substantially retained and supplemented by the additional new native hedgerow and tree planting. The rural character of Green Lane would be conserved and enhanced through species diversification of replacement hedgerows, the location of the proposed building and car park at a low level, and the removal of concrete blocks and the infilling of gaps in the hedgerow along Green Lane. And I refer there to a hedgerow enhancement plan, which is my Appendix G, where I identify 5 gaps in the hedgerow where it results in a sort of declining character because of not only the visibility of concrete blocks, but this gappy nature of the roadside hedgerow, which gives the impression of it not being well maintained. Moving on, Stainhill Plantation would be enlarged on its eastern side. Areas of wildflower meadows, amenity grassland and specimen trees would be provided in the memorial gardens and would contribute to a well-vegetated setting for the building and car park. The appeal scheme would result in a biodiversity net gain. A net was missed out there, and an enhanced ecological character to the site. The final paragraph, there would be new recreational opportunities created as the proposed memorial gardens and its peripheral walks will be available for use by both the general public and crematorium visitors. The appeal scheme would have negligible effects on existing dark skies due to the use of directional lighting units and their limited hours of operation.
Thank you very much. That deals with the landscape effects. Then the effects on visual openness of the green belt, please. The next section, 11.3.
Yes, the appeal scheme, located at a low level in the landscape, would not interrupt any of the existing extensive views across the green belt from either the west or the east, as identified in the landscape appraisal for the Cadby to Adwick Limestone Plateau landscape character area. It would be located in a visually secluded area that provides a negligible contribution to the visual openness of the green belt. It would not be visible in the elevated views from the southwest due to the cumulative screening effects of intervening landform, trees and buildings. Extensive views to the west are not available from either Scoresby, Scorethorpe or Adwick Street on the periphery of the green belt, or from adjacent sections of Barnsley Road and Green Land, i.e. adjacent to those urban areas, due to the enclosure provided by the ridge of elevated land that extends southeast and south from Brodsworth Community Woodland. And you can best see that ridge of elevated land in my figure 2, local topography. Views tend to open up from Green Lane as the road descends northwestwards past Long Plantation. However, views of the proposed building, car park and memorial gardens located at a low level in the landscape would be difficult to obtain due to the enclosure provided by intervening landform and vegetation, and would not obstruct any long distance views from Green Lane towards Brodsworth and Brodsworth Hall. And very briefly, Ma'am, in terms of those views, I would refer to photograph I in my proof of evidence, where there's a view of Brodsworth Hall from Green Lane, and another view of relevance there is photograph C, which is looking south from Green Lane, providing a long distance view towards Duckerholt and beyond, and towards Stainhill Plantation. But as I say in my proof of evidence, there's intervening landform there where the site is not visible in these views south from Green Lane. This area of green belt has some capacity in visibility terms to accommodate new built development, particularly a building of such limited height, scale and massing as the proposed crematorium building. The proposed building, located in a low-lying secluded location, would not contribute to any visual coalescence with any other built form in the green belt. The nearest being the cluster of housing at Little Canada off Green Lane to the east. There would be no reduction in the sense of separation between settlements and no intervisibility between the appeal scheme and any settlements. There would be no change to the visual setting of the urban edge of Doncaster. There would be low-level changes to the components of the view from Green Lane on the approach to the proposed entrance. Visual change to the rear of the replacement hedgerow would be limited to temporary glimpsed views of the internal access road. The strong sense of openness of the view from Green Lane, obtained from the roadside hedgerow, seen against the skyline, would be retained at both year 1 and year 10. And by that, Mum, I would refer you to photograph E1 of my Appendix C, where it illustrates that sense of openness. The visual openness of the green belt would be preserved. There would be negligible changes to views from the south, west and northwest, including views from the registered parkland at Brodsworth Hall. The appeal scheme would not result in any truncation of greenbelt views, and the visual openness of the greenbelt would be preserved. The appeal scheme would enable public access onto part of the greenbelt to the south of Green Lane for the first time. The opportunity for people to experience the visual openness of the greenbelt would be enhanced.
Thank you. And then I think if you just read the next two sections, I've got 1 or 2 further questions to ask you.
In terms of effects on the indicative green wedge, the appeal scheme would not compromise the functions of green wedges as set out in the core strategy. It would not reduce existing levels of connectivity between built-up areas and the countryside. There would be no physical or visual coalescence or merging of settlements, as the appeal scheme would be located in a secluded, well-enclosed area of land. The proposed crematorium is a green and spacious land use and would not restrict any of the existing recreational opportunities within the indicative green wedge. The visual setting and identity of the settlements would also be conserved, as there would be no intervisibility between the appeal scheme and the settlements on either side of the indicative green wedge. For the reasons set out in my evidence, I disagree with the assessment of landscape harm in the officer's report and consider that there is no landscape or visual basis to withhold planning permission for the appeal scheme.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, just 1 or 2 other things, and pick them up as soon as quickly as we can. 2.8.
Yes.
Here you're dealing with the local level landscape character assessment. Is there anything further you wish to say about this?
No, other than to sort of say, well, it points out that there are various visual detractors within this local landscape character areas. There's noise and traffic movement, and importantly, it has a relatively high degree of enclosure compared to land on the western side of the A1M.
Yeah, okay. The site at 4.5, just ask you about that. Yes, you were, I think, praised for your description at 4.5.2. But in case this might have been some Trojan horse of a compliment, do you want to say anything as to whether or not that description, in your view, makes the site less suitable for this form of development?
No, I think it's it makes it entirely appropriate for this form of development, insofar as the whole nature of crematoria and their associated memorial gardens. It's very important to have a tranquil landscape, and this is one of the reasons why this site was selected. It is a very tranquil landscape for the reasons I set out. I suppose it's worth pointing out that the noise issue and associated with the A1M Where the memorial gardens and the buildings located, as I say, it's only perceptible as a background hum. When you go further to the north, up the extension of the site to Green Lane, that's where the A1M does have you can see the traffic, and it becomes a little bit quite noticeable in terms of its noise.
One of the points that was made by Miss Oxley was that she says at 1.25, for example, but she says there's a number of locations, that a road passing through open countryside is not unexpected. As an area of development which is more suburban in character and by its nature requires good access to communities, would more typically be found within or adjacent to a settlement rather than in undeveloped countryside. Now, Mr. Kirkpatrick, you've got considerable experience in dealing with crematoria applications. What are, leaving aside planning policy issues, what are other statutory requirements which have a bearing on the location of development of this kind?
Well, I think there's a statutory requirement that a crematorium building needs to be set back a certain distance, both from the highway and from residential properties. So that inevitably results in access off a main road being a driveway that is required for those reasons.
I think the access, the 50 yards, I mean, approximately 50 meters in new money, and for access, for distance from the public highway. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
And it's 200 yards for distance from residential development. Is that correct?
Just checking now in my Appendix A.
I think you find it's the cremation.
Yes, it is correct. Yes.
Cremation Act 1902.
1902 Act. Yes.
Thank you very much. So, do you accept the correctness of this general proposition put by Miss Oxley at 1.25?
No, I don't. I think I think I've dealt with so many crematorium development in the open countryside, within and outside the green belt, and so I don't really agree with her statement. And I think it's also, yeah, no, I don't.
I mean, are there examples of before the inquiry for the inspector to read in what's laughingly referred to as her free time in decision letters with such development?
Yes, of course. So if we go to sort of the core document list, I could refer you, ma'am, to which is not on my list. 1 second, please. H24, core document H24, land north of Witton Piggery, which is a crematorium in near Huntington. Let's see what else have we got here. Land off Broad Lane, Essington, up at Wolverhampton. And in both those cases, ma'am, you will find the requirement for the access road has been accommodated within the open countryside.
The Essington one, there was another site.
And
Mr. Kirkpatrick, could you just give me the core document reference number of the second, the Wolverhampton one?
yes, that's H11. I'll need to go back into that. I believe that it covers both two crematorium, but one at Broad Lane, Essington, and the other at Works, as it was a conjoined inquiry.
That was actually a decision of the Secretary of State, was it, in relation to those two? Thank you. Right. I don't want to ask you to read anything out of sections 6 and 7, which deal with visual effects on views and visual amenity and effects on visual openness of the green belt. But just on visual openness, do you accept the proposition that there would be material harm to the openness of the green belt?
No, I don't. For the reasons set out in my proof, I think it's a extremely well visually contained development, and looking at all the aspects of visual openness relating to the green belt in terms of the long distance views, the views from Green Lane, etc. I think I find no effect on those long distance views.
Thank you. Landscape effects in section 8. Do you want to say, yes, do you want to deal with landscape and visual integration? Is there anything further you wish to add in relation to that? I mean, for example, the criticism of the species to be used and the suggestion that there would be an adverse effect on character by the use of non-native species around the crematorium building.
Well, I'm afraid I depart company from Miss Oxley on that. I certainly don't agree with her comments. And I think there's a number of issues there that I'll just run through. So I find the correct reference. So we have, the planting plans for the crematorium include both native and ornamental species. Quite importantly, over 80% of the proposed individual trees, and those are classified as trees, specimen trees and specimens on the planting schedule, over 80% will be native species. Now, those native trees, apart from crabapple, are typically will grow to 15 to 25 metre height. So those are the sturdy species, deciduous species that we associate with the English countryside, and those are going to grow to much larger heights than the ornamental trees, which are typically in the order of 4 to 8 metres high. Now, those ornamental trees are focused in the central part of the site, and I think that's been acknowledged, focused on the car park. In terms of other vegetation types, we've got 100% of the proposed peripheral hedging and internal hedging. There will all be native species. 100% of the wetland meadow, clay soil meadow, and turf species would be meadow. So the ornamental, apart from those relatively small ornamental trees in the core of the site, we've also got some vegetation around the building and those are classified as crematorium planting and rain garden. Now, those are ornamental shrubs and ground cover species. So I don't think that this is a reasonable comment, because the trees that are going to have the greatest effect on character are those tall native trees, of which it's over 80%. I would also add that I think that it's important to take into account climate change and some aspects of ecology do, I think, point towards the use of some ornamental species, because if you can get more pollinators in terms of bumblebees and so on, and we've tried to address that through crabapple and apple trees and so on. But I think ornamental species do have an increasingly important role in the landscape, and I think as landscape professionals, it's something that we need to grapple with. I did have a conversation with the estate manager about this, and all the advice they're being given by arboriculturalists and estate management experts is that the English countryside needs to adapt to new species. We've got the threats of disease that's increasingly affecting native trees. And we've got the problem of drought and extreme heat and extreme flooding and so on. So there is a need to gradually increase and sensitively bring in ornamental species. Thank you.
In terms of the proposed tree planting of extra heavy standards, Miss Oxley said that they were about 2.5 meters high. Is that your understanding?
No, they're not. So extra heavy standards are typically planted at about 5 meters high. Yeah, the average we've used is 5.5 meters high. And those are going to grow the order of 0.35, 0.45 centimeters a year. So after 5 years, you're going to get a height of approximately 7 meters. I think what she may have been referring to is the woodland buffer planting. Now that's planted, proposed at 2.25 meters average height. And again, by the time come that, say 5 years, that's over almost 4 meters in height.
Thank you very much. Now, I just want to deal with one question about public access onto the site. What's your understanding of the position as to whether there is in actual fact any public access into the site at the moment?
There is no public right of way across the site or permissive footpaths of any form whatsoever, so there is no public access.
Yep. Right, few other short points, please. The MSA Miss Oxley had, I think, some difficulty identifying precisely where the MSA site was. Is that something you can assist the inspector with?
Yes, indeed. I've been able to download the appeal documents from the web, and the MSA site abuts Barnsley Road on its southern boundary, and partially abuts the A1M. So it's the access was off the A1M Barnsley Road junction 37. But it does not extend far up. There is a swathe of agricultural land that leads up from Barnsley Road to Green Lane, but this MSA site is very much on the southern part of that. And if you look at my figure 1 in my proof of evidence.
Yeah.
If you can see the words Mar Bridge,
yes.
Okay, so that's the capital M. The top of the capital M is where the northern site boundaries is. It then veers to the northeast, probably going not as far as the word plantation and a long plantation, and then it veers back down to the southeast. So it's very much a parcel of land in the southern part of this belt of agricultural land. So no, not close to the site.
And what sort of area did it cover? Do you know?
Let me just see if I've got a figure here. So 15.1 hectares as opposed to our 6.3 hectares.
Thank you. And in terms of buildings, that included a hotel and
yes.
The other paraphernalia associated with motorway service areas.
It does. So there's what's called as an amenity building, a fuel filling station, together with a canopy over the fuel pumps, a drive-through coffee unit, and a 103-bedroom lodge. The figures in the inspector's report identify 7,290 square metres of building footprint. That contrasts with the appeal scheme, which has 760. So approximately 1/10 of what is proposed compared to the MSA.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ponds, lakes, difference between a pond and a lake. Are there any water features in the area in any event?
Yes, I think the comment, well, first of all, the comment was made in the context of a relatively small area of land of the local landscape character assessment, LLCA1. The answer is that, yes, there are water features in the area. The ecological appraisal, which is core documents, I'll just look that up 1 second, please. B14. Identifies 3 ponds of interest. 2 are on the northern side of Green Lane. 1 is immediately south of the site, where and the point is made that actually that's dried up now, but there is a watercourse heading south from Stainhill Plantation. So those are the watercourses identified in the ecological appraisal. And of course, the reintroduction of water or the addition of supplementary water features is there for positive reasons in terms of wildlife enhancement. It's also part of the sense of peace and meditation opportunities associated with the crematorium building. In a slightly wider area, outside LLCA1, which was actually where the original comment came from, I think. If you go to my figure 1.1, site location and context, we can see 2 or 3 ponds on the eastern side of Mar, on the northern side of Barnsley Road. We've also got a huge number of ponds and watercourses around Brodsworth Community Woodland. We've got ponds on the southern edge of Brodsworth, the northern edge of Pickburn, on the western edge of Scoresby, etc. They are not alien features at all. They're an important part of landscape character. I think the original comment came from the landscape character assessment for character area C2, which of course is a much larger area, and I suspect they've taken that in the whole and say, well, they're relatively rare, but actually when you zoom down to this, to the local landscape associated with this site, east and west of the A1M, ponds are quite notable features.
Urban design issues. It appears that Miss Oxley departs from or has a different view to the council's urban design officer, who concluded that the design of the proposal seems well considered in relation to the surrounding landscape setting and could result in a good quality development which is sensitive to context and attractive in its own right. What's your view about that? And also, could you say a few words about the use of materials, please?
Yes, firstly, my view of that, I think the urban design officer is appointed to assess not only the quality of the building, but also its context and setting and how a building responds to that. It's an essential part of being an architect. You look at context, you look at what is sensitive and how design responds to it. To suggest that he has not done that properly, I think, is inappropriate. What else? In terms of the materials, again, the building has been sensitively designed I think in every respect. But in terms of materials, there is use of local stone. And Ma'am, when we come to the site visit and we walk around, we can pick up some of that, of the very much light coloured stone that's been used. It's there in the fields. And there's also reference on the building to the use of render, which is another distinctive feature of the surrounding villages. I think what struck me about Miss Oxley's comment is admission that she's very much a traditionalist, I think was the word. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. But and I think I appreciate that some people feel uncomfortable about modern architecture, perhaps because they're not used to it. But I think it's relevant to refer to the new local plan policy 41, where it says that imaginative design and development solutions will be encouraged, including innovative and contemporary architecture, to ensure that proposals respect and enhance identity, character, and local distinctiveness. It sets out a number of principles, including recognition and reinforcement of the character of the local landscape and building traditions, etc. So this is precisely what this appeal scheme delivers. It's a very sensitively designed building that responds to its local landscape context.
Would you just turn to Mr. Taylor's evidence, please? He, at 4.41, he's dealing in this section with the Doncaster landscape character and capacity study, 2007, and at 441 he refers to mitigation measures and identifies mitigation measures that could be effective in reducing impacts from development, which are discussed for both housing development and strategic employment. And in fairness to him, Mr. Taylor said in answer to the inspector in re-examination, or rather in answer to her questions, that he considered the form of development proposed by the appeal scheme to be of a lesser order of magnitude than strategic employment. Just to tell me, though, how it measures up against the mitigation measures referred to in 441.
Well, I think the mitigation measures are relevant to a range of development types, and the principles being avoid fragmenting the rural landscape by locating on the edges of existing settlements. In that case, I think it's not applicable to, that applies more to large scale of strategic allocations of employment and housing, and a single building it does not introduce such potential effect. Build on a much smaller scale to fit in with the scale of nearby built areas and limit visual impacts. Well, yes, this is very much on that smaller scale in the spectrum. Use of traditional building materials that are characteristic of the area, such as limestone, is precisely what has been proposed. Locate near existing major roads to avoid creating new roads or changing minor roads, incurring further loss of character. Well, I think you can bring in new roads into a landscape successfully if they're well designed and well located. And of course, as we've already discussed, there is a requirement for a component of new roads that is a statutory requirement. Screen from sensitive viewers where possible using existing landform and or hedges, trees and woodland. Well, again, the site location and design achieves this. It's a really remarkably well enclosed site in terms of the existing landform and existing vegetation. Allow existing hedges to grow, replace missing hedges and plant more trees characteristic of the area. Well, we can tick that box. That's precisely what we're doing. Allowing the western site boundary hedge to grow up, to gap up, fill in the gaps along the northern site boundary, the southern site boundary, and the western site boundary, all enhancing that local framework, and the addition of a new hedge north-south along the eastern site boundary. Plant more trees characteristic of the area, spot on, that's exactly what we're doing. Conserve landscape features, including the stone gate posts, roads, hedges and streams. Again, we're conserving and enhancing the roadside hedges. Stone gate posts, that's being proposed, and that's on the general arrangement plan for the gate, specifically stating with a stone gate post. And finally, enhance visual existing screening, such as the tree belt along the stream. Well, yes, we are expanding staying plantation with additional vegetation. We're adding more native trees, 80% of all tree species within the site.
Thank you. Those are all my questions in examination in chief.
Thank you, Mr. Village and Mr. Kirkpatrick. Just looking at the time, it's nearly 3:15. I think it would be an appropriate time to have a break, and Mr. Robson can commence cross-examination at that point. So I shall adjourn the inquiry until 3:30. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. It's now 3:30 and we're to resume the inquiry. Just while you're there, Mr. Robson, I noticed that recording has started, so the IT issues seem to be resolved. So thank you to the council's team for that.
Yes, ma'am. That's back up and running. I think there was an issue with recording yesterday, and there are some emails which I haven't seen between your case officer and the council. I've asked for an update as to what's happening with the recordings from yesterday, and hopefully when the IT system at the council is back up and running such that my team can email me, they will provide the update as to where we are, ma'am. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. These things happen.
Yeah.
Also, Mr. Robson, can you just point me in the direction of the documents that you're going to use for the cross-examinations? Just my computer is starting to overheat with the amount of documents I have open. And last time they did that, it shut down on me in the middle of a local plan hearing, so I don't want that to happen.
Oh dear, we don't. It will be Mr. Kirkpatrick's proof of evidence and his appendices. B20, which is a difficult set to open. I'm having difficulties with that one, which is the landscape drawings. I opened them last night and I've just left my computer running because it took a while to get them going. If when we get there it isn't open, ma'am, I'll find another way of taking those questions.
Okay, thank you. And any other documents I need to?
The levels plan, Miss Oxley's proof of evidence. The LVA.
Yeah.
And ma'am, I think, or I hope, just looking through my notes, they are the main ones, ma'am. Oh, we will need F9 and F10.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Any other documents will depend on what Mr. Kirkpatrick says.
Okay. Thank you. Well, you can now commence your cross-examination of Mr. Kirkpatrick. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Good afternoon to you.
Can you hear me okay and
Yes,
see me okay?
Thank you.
I've got a slight, you've got a slight robot voice on your microphone, which hopefully will go away. If it doesn't, it may be that you need to turn your microphone off and on during the cross-examination. I've got my notes and my documents either side, so I'm not trying to be shifty when my eyes are looking left and right. It's just that I've got two other screens that have different pieces of information on. So forgive me if I'm not always looking straight down the barrel of the camera. I'd like to start with your proof of evidence, please, Mr. Kirkpatrick. And you tell us at 1.3.1 that you were commissioned by the appellant in April 2018. That's right.
That's correct, yes.
And have you been continuously commissioned by them, so a 3.5 year involvement to date?
Yes, I'm glad to say I have.
And I've noticed your name on a few other appeal decisions involving the appellant. I think Essington you were involved in, and Mr. Village mentioned your experience doing crematoria cases. Have you done a number of cases for this appellant?
I would say 3 or 4. Yes.
Thank you. And you give your role as project director. Now, were you personally involved in drafting the documents, the LVA, etc.? As we'll get to each of them in due course, but your involvement is direct.
Yes, I can confirm I'm the author of the LVA.
Okay, very good. Do you have any assistance at all on the production of these documents?
Yes, of course, but only in terms of graphics. But all the field survey work and assessment work is carried out by myself.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. And you give at again at 1.3.1, your role since April 2018, appraisal of the site and its surrounding landscape, guide to the appeal scheme master plan and the landscape and visual integration, the landscape design proposals, and prepare the LVA. And of course, we can add a number 5, can't we? Preparing the proof of evidence for this appeal.
Indeed.
Is that the full extent of your role? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
That's a good summary, yes.
Were you involved in advising on the design of the building?
No. Other than, you know, we have a landscape context, and that context is imparted to the architect, and he's fully aware of it. And we've met up on site to assess the character and sensitivities of the site.
Yes, there is a boundary, isn't there, between where the architect's work stops and where yours starts. Obviously, there needs to be a handshake across that boundary. But in terms of the design of the building and the the retaining walls, that would be the architect.
Substantially, there's a degree of discussion that goes on between an architect and a landscape architect in terms of, I suppose, the layout of a site, in terms of the alignments of roads, locations of features, and so it is a bit of an iterative process. But of course, there's a stage where the architect then pushes ahead and develops his design.
Thank you very much. And is the design, as far as you know, having done other jobs with the appellant, a bespoke design, or does it have other examples?
It is a design that is bespoke, but there's some very similar. There are similar examples that have been developed for crematoria by this particular architect. But having said that, there's a concept that he has, and that is brought and developed for each site. So you might have, I don't know, you might have a room set aside for signing a book of remembrance by grieving friends and relatives, in which case that particular building could be to the side, it could be to the front. So, but there are similarities in terms of some other crematory buildings that this particular architect has worked on, and you'll see those if you look at the Wergs appeal and also the Huntington appeal, both of which were successful. But those there are some similarities in the buildings for both those projects. Sorry, I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Oh. I outsmarted myself again already today. Shouldn't press that button to try and mute myself. The inspector, for her notes, but I hope we don't need to go there. You give examples, you'll recall, in your design and access statement of images of previous crematoria by Dignity that use a similar palette of materials to those at Brodsworth. That would be if I can characterise it, the template from which the architect then works for each individual appeal. Would that be fair?
I couldn't comment on that, how many schemes this architect has done. Not all of them I would have been involved in, but in terms of materials, those are in my experience of working with this architect, those are always reflecting the local context. And I recall walking around with the architect on this site, and we're looking at the stone in the fields, and that determines that informs typically buildings that are adopted, the materials that are adopted for a building, as one might expect.
Thank you. In terms of your other functions with the appellant on this, were you involved at all in the site selection process?
No.
Thank you. And you you wrote the LVA 18 months after your commission. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
LVA dated 17th of December 2019, of course, commissioned in April 2018. So by the time of the LVA, 18 months later, how many times had you visited the site?
I have visited the site on 4 occasions. By the time of the LVIA, that was the second and third occasion.
Sorry, so by the time you'd written the LVIA and finalised it for submission, you'd been to site 3 times.
Yes.
Can you remember when you went to site, please?
Ooh, I couldn't.
Just need to be, I don't need days, but just roughly, month may help.
Well, no, I couldn't. I do apologise. My memory fails me there. But clearly, you will see from the winter photography that I was there probably on the last occasion between sort of October, November and February, November 2017, February 2018, of that order.
Yes, certainly clear from the winter photographs that you visited and took those photos when the trees were bare. Had you visited in the summer months before you wrote the LVA?
I actually don't believe I had, no. That's not unusual for an LVAA. It's then up to myself as an assessor to visualize, and with experience, one can come to a view on the degree of screening effect that comes from the period when trees are in leaf.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah. And your role for the inspector is to present the worst case scenario, isn't it? Which will be the winter months when the trees are bare, and you will be able to see more of the site because screening has reduced.
Well, I wouldn't personally. I would like to say I present in the report the maximum visibility.
Yes, and you will get maximum
visibility. Then it's also important to consider, at least in the back of one's mind, the effects during the summer months. But maximum visibility, yes.
And maximum visibility will be most likely in the winter months.
Correct.
And that's why, as you say, it's not unusual not to have visited in summer because you've already seen the site when it's most visible in winter.
That's correct.
Thank you. Your next piece of work, if I'm following the timeline correctly, was your proof of evidence exchanged on the 14th of September this year. So we're now 22 months after the LVA and 3.5 years since you were commissioned. Is that right? That
appears to be correct. Yes.
No other pieces of work between the LVA and the submission of your proof?
No, there was another piece of work, and that was following the preparation, the issue of the LVIA review by LUC. I did prepare a short statement. I think it was entitled Landscape Statement, which really just commented on the LVIA findings, pointing out that there was
the review findings.
The review findings, apologies, yes. Pointing out that there was substantial agreement with the LVA findings, and I think pointing out that there was another factor that should be taken into consideration, that being the quality of the landscape design and architectural proposals.
But there's nothing in that note which amended your level of assessment from the LVA?
No.
Now, the design of the whole of the scheme so everything within the red line, hasn't changed as far as I know since submission, has it?
It has not.
And it was submitted, I have to remember, I want to say start January 2020, I think, or for April 2020, forgive me.
Sorry,
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Again, my memory fails me, but at some point...
Memory failures all round then, I think.
At some point, there was a minor change to the red line boundary in terms of discussions for these vehicular sight lines, reflecting highways, but I don't recall whether that was... it must have been pre-submission.
That's right. Yep. There was a change to the red line boundary to deal with visibility displays, but in terms of the building, the car park, the memorial gardens, the road, the lake or pond, depending on what definition you want to use, the landscaping, none of that has changed.
Correct.
Since submission.
No change.
And of course, probably the daftest question of all, but the receiving landscape hasn't changed either, has it?
No. Just quickly thinking that through, I think that's correct. There's no changes since submission.
No, thank you. If you could go to your proof of evidence at 6.1.2, please. And here you're dealing with effect on views and visual amenity.
Mm-hmm.
And in the section views from the north, do you have that paragraph?
Yes, I do.
You'll note the final sentence, you change your assessment from a very low magnitude of change to the users of Brodsworth Community Woodland, changing that down to negligible in year 1 and year 10.
Yes. Following
Additional field survey work. And then 6.1.5 in views from the south, you change a very low magnitude of visual change for users of Barnsley Road should be adjusted to a negligible change at both year 1 and year 10 following additional field survey work undertaken for this appeal. And then again at 6.1.8, the LVA the final two sentences, the LVA identified a very low or negligible magnitude of visual change. In my judgment, this assessment should be adjusted to a negligible change at both year 1 and year 10 following additional field survey work undertaken for this appeal. What I'm unclear about, Mr. Kirkpatrick, is that after 3.5 years involvement with a scheme, with no changes in design, with no changes in the landscape, with 3 site visits already having been undertaken, what was the additional field work that you did, funnily enough, just before this appeal and your evidence that resulted in you downgrading these visual harms?
Okay, so I think when it comes to preparing a proof of evidence for an inquiry, I have, as ever, gone back to the site to check the current landscape and visual conditions. Very often, when preparing a proof of evidence, there is a lot more detail that needs to be considered. It may be that there's changes to policy, and there's certainly in terms of perhaps commentary from officers' report, and in this case there was also representations from the joint rural parishes who did comment on views from Brodsworth Hall and from the community woodland, I believe. In the case of the, if we start with the community woodland, having received a commentary from the joint rural parishes that actually, you haven't really fully addressed, or there are views that you haven't considered. I've walked far more extensively around the woodland than I had when preparing the landscape and visual appraisal. And having done that, I've reviewed my thoughts and my judgment over the magnitude of visual change. And it struck me that in terms of potential views from that woodland, actually it's very, very restricted, more restricted than I thought it was, with the result that I felt it was appropriate to, instead of describing it as a very low change, to describe it as a negligible change, because the availability of views is very limited indeed, both in the winter and the summer months. Moving on to Barnsley Road, views from the south. That was in the LVA. That was reported as a very low effect of negligible significance at year 1 and year 10. Having revisited that viewpoint, it occurred to me that actually I was simply wrong in the LVA. What I had assumed was that where there is a gap in the vegetation along the northern edge of the roundabout and Barnsley Road, I'd assume that, well, people when they're going around the roundabout would see that, and they would see northwards towards the site. It was clear on the visit for preparing for this inquiry that actually when you're moving round the roundabout, you're moving in a clockwise manner, of course, but when it comes to the gap, the vehicle direction of travel is to the southeast, and it's not a question of an oblique view towards the site. One would have to turn round over one's shoulder to see the site. So it seemed to me entirely appropriate to say, well, that is a negligible view. The final change was from Brodsworth Hall. I'd made the commentary that there's likely to be glimpse views from the upper floor of the hall. I've been able to go to visit the Brodsworth Hall and Gardens. Again, the first time round, I had not visited the hall itself in terms of going to the upper floor or the ground floor, but I'd gone to the car park area. I've had a much more extensive walk around the grounds of the hall, and I've been to the upper floor of the building to check views. And again, following that more extensive field work and mindful of what had been said by the joint rural parishes, again, I've just come to the conclusion that rather than describe this as a very low change, very low or negligible magnitude of visual change, I've put it firmly in the negligible category.
Thank you. So just to unpick a lot of that, you said that when you started that you'd gone back to the site. Of course, that's perfectly reasonable and proper to have done, and that a lot more detail needs to be considered. So you're saying a lot more detail needs to be considered for your brief than was for your application. So you didn't consider detail at that stage?
No, I think in the sense that I cited the example of the commentary from the joint rural parishes. With our post-application, we're aware of the issues that are raised in the officer's report and the reasons for refusal, and those all point, to my mind, to looking in more detail to make sure that those concerns that have been raised are fully addressed, and so hence my expression.
And changes to policy, the local plan was well and truly emerging at submission, and it's now adopted. Did you not take into account at submission stage the emerging local plan?
I did, but I apologise. I cited that as an example of why sometimes one goes into more detail. Yeah.
But not in this case, because there were no changes to policy.
Yeah, no.
Thank you. The community woodland, you say you've walked far more extensively around the woodland. Why didn't you walk extensively around what is a well-used community woodland adjoining over the road the appeal site with raised land within it when you were doing the LVA?
I think sometimes when visiting sort of a large area, it's possible to miss out areas. There might be a footpath that one hasn't walked down, and with local knowledge of tracks and viewpoints, sometimes that happens. It's yes, of course, you're right. Basically, it should have been covered in the LVIA initially, and that all should have been extensively walked. But the reality, what has happened is that I've made a judgment, and based on a reasonable and what I felt was a proportionate site visit, but that additional detail, additional field survey work, of course, was carried out for the appeal.
So just to be clear, when you did the LVA, you didn't go to the community woodland, was that?
No, I did go to the community woodland.
You just didn't walk it extensively.
I didn't walk it as extensively as I should have done.
Thank you. Now the viewpoints themselves, we will get on to talking about the detail of those viewpoints a bit later on. And of course, as ever with these things, the inspector will assess them on her site visit, and will already have a degree of knowledge about them from visiting the site. But I do just want to look quickly at Brodsworth Hall now, because it was something that was mentioned in your examination in chief. So please, if we could go to 3.1 and 3.2 in Miss Oxley's proof.
Yes, I have that.
Thank you. Now, you don't dispute that that is the site that can be seen in those photographs as marked?
Not at all. That is, well...
it is the field.
No, I think it's correctly identifying the orientation towards the site. The only point I would make is that it's the arrows terminate at the upper point of that field, and of course, in the view, the site itself is visually very close to the western site boundary hedgerow. I mean, it's not I don't raise that as any criticism. It's, you know, it's quite difficult to sometimes to get a graphics team to correctly pull arrows down and there with the scale of some of these photographs. It can be a little tricky, but essentially those two arrows pointing towards the site are of pointing towards not only the site but the wider field.
Okay.
Yep.
And of course, it's the appellant's responsibility in an application and in an appeal, isn't it, to show that it's the effect that its development will have on the landscape. It's your job.
It is indeed, yes.
And there was a request by the local authority at pre-application stage to produce photo montages.
I'd need to go back to that. My recollection was there was a request for visualizations, and those were what was produced in the design and access statement.
It's for, I don't think we need to go there. It is visualizations, but for the inspector's note, it's CDA for the pre-app response, where the request was made for visualizations to be submitted.
I think what you perhaps have in mind is verifiable photomontages. That wasn't my understanding of what was required, nor in the officer's report was that raised as an issue.
But well, the issue that I've got is that we're now in a position where you're disputing what can and can't be seen from, for example, Brodsworth Hall. In your examination in chief, you said, well, the road will snake down. You won't see a great deal of it. There'll be screening to the south, although they'd have to be 20 metres tall. But you've not provided the inspector with what would answer a lot of questions and solve a lot of inquiry time had you have done, which would be a photo montage or a visualisation of the development as seen from Brodsworth Hall.
Well, I don't actually think that a visualisation of or a verifiable photomontage from Brodsworth Hall would assist this inquiry at all, insofar as it's going to pick up, if one modelled, for example, the road and say, I don't know, 2 metres height of a typical vehicle, and put that on photographs. I think it's not going to, because of the distance, and you then have the whole issue of how thick is a line and so on, and then you have to thicken the line to make sure it's visible. I think that's actually quite problematic from this viewpoint.
With a 2 metre high car, that may well be, but what about with a 2-lane wide, 510 metre long tarmacked road?
Well, I think what these existing photographs do show is that the availability of views towards the western site boundary. So we know where the road is in relationship to that broadly. The question is, would you see, is the road sloping down towards Brodsworth Hall or not? And the answer is, of course, no. It's flat for the except for where it swings round out of sight on this on these photographs, right on the northern edge. So again, I don't think that's something you could pick up readily on a photomontage.
And the inspector, when on site, totally unassisted by the appellant, will need to decide whether or not this road will be seen, but must also, I think we can agree, having her mind that there will be movement along this road as cars are entering and exiting the site.
Yes, of course, that's an important issue.
And so if it is visible, that movement would make it highlighted within what is otherwise a relatively static rural view.
Absolutely. I think it may be helpful to just go a little bit earlier and in Miss Oxley's proof to photograph 2.2, because it's a closer viewpoint. And this is a view from Church Lane.
Yes.
And again, we've got the same issue that we've got the site, the arrow to the site. It's a little high in to my mind. It's upslope of the site, but you've got there the hedgerow, which certainly on along the western site boundary, and certainly its northern section, it's about 3 to 4 metres high. The inspector will see that hedgerow on site and come to a view whether or not cars moving approximately 5 metres or so, I'll have to check that, away from the hedgerow would be visible. And she'll come to her view on that, but it's achievable.
Cars, as of course, moving within a still landscape are highlighted and will draw the attention of a receptor, won't they, of a viewer?
They will. And of course, I think it's important to note that A, the receptor here along Church Lane is moving, and B, there is is B, to be mindful of the frequency of car movements within the site.
Well, I think you mentioned later on in your proof that it will be relatively low, limited car movements. If you give me, I can't find I'll find the precise wording. But in the evidence of in the planning evidence provided by Mr. Williams, his paragraph 8.6, if you have it to hand, if not, I can read it. I don't think it's necessary. The sentence he provides is, the average number of cars per service, excluding the funeral vehicles, usually one hearse and one limo, varies between 27 and 32. So each hour you've got between 27 and 32, well, plus the hearse and the limo, so 29 and 34 vehicles entering the site. And because one service follows the last, you'd have between 29 and 34 vehicles leaving the site.
Yes.
Yes.
I think, as I understand the likely arrangements, that the vehicles will all enter the site. There will be a service. Vehicles will depart, and then, because it's quite a well considered slot time wise, it's then if there is another booking, then they will arrive following that. So I guess my point is that you wouldn't have people leaving, unlikely to have people leaving and departing arriving at the same time.
I think that's the plan. So if they're not leaving and departing at the same time, then over the course of each hour, you've got 29 to 34, so 58 to 60 to 68, if my maths is right, vehicles exiting or arriving at the site.
Yes, that would appear to be correct, and I suppose the issue is whether or not those would be visible behind the existing hedgerow and or the proposed vegetation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in the absence of any assistance from you on terms of photo montages, we can agree, can't we, that in assessing the visual impact when the inspector goes onto site, she must have in her mind where the access road runs, and that there will be 58 to 68 vehicles an hour travelling up and down it, and what the visual effect of that will be. That is an important part of assessing the visual impact of this scheme.
It is.
It is. Good, thank you. Right, could we take a slight diversion, I hope, into matters of agreement? So firstly, on what is meant by greenbelt openness, we can agree, can't we, that it has a visual and a spatial element?
We can.
And that the spatial element means an absence of built form.
That is my understanding. Yes.
And the visual element, there is necessarily a degree of crossover between how one assesses the visual impact on the openness of the greenbelt and how one assesses visual impact in landscape and visual terms.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And when you're doing your landscape and visual assessments, there is a difference between assessing landscape impact and assessing visual impact.
Correct.
Thank you. And landscape impact is not just about what you can see of the development, although of course that is part of it. Yes?
Correct.
And it has to be an assessment of the development as a whole, every part of the development being proposed.
Yes, yeah, it's holistic.
So if we could please go to I'm in B20, but I realise it's problematic, B20s, but it's the site master plan, which may be easier in your appendices.
So that's my appendix F.
Appendix F, that's right. Sorry, I've been using B20, but it's a problematic file, I have to say. Your appendices are much more friendly to me.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. I don't know why B20 just doesn't seem to want to open on my computer.
It's strange. I personally haven't got a problem, but I'm sure sometimes it happens.
I was going to say, because you're operating on paper, which would remove all of the problems.
No. I've got a digital version as well. It does open.
So just looking at the master plan, we can agree, can't we, that we've already agreed about the road in visual terms. It's also the road in terms of landscape effect is a consideration.
Yes.
Yes. The access point marked 1. Yes.
Yes.
All of the planting, structural and ornamental.
Yep.
Is a landscape and visual consideration. The cut and fill is a landscape and visual consideration.
Yes.
All of the memorial gardens, so the planting and the footpath. Yes, in terms of scale and also the materials. Car park, building, and should we agree it's a pond rather than a lake? Should we end that dispute? Let's shake hands and agree that it's a pond.
We have a deal.
We have a deal. Excellent. And obviously, of course, the pond needs to be considered in landscape and visual terms.
Yeah.
Right. So everything within that red line needs to be assessed. And this, of course, is a full application, isn't it?
It is.
So the only, well, there is condition 11, which allows for, if you want to pull it up, actually, it's in the planning statement of common ground, which I have, Ma'am. Sorry, I should have raised this one. It's A8. You have a paper copy, Ma'am. I'm pleased to see that. I'm not breaking your computer as well.
I'm old-fashioned on that front.
A8, the list of conditions aren't in the statement of common ground. There is the list of conditions. Forgive me. There is a condition. If I just let you know the content of condition 11, Mr. I've got it entirely separately, having assumed it would be in the statement of common ground. But condition 11 allows for the submission of finalised, detailed, hard and soft landscaping schemes based on the landscaping general arrangement plans. So that the way that the permission is going to operate is that you've submitted the plans on which the inspector is determining this application, and then the application under the condition for the detailed hard and soft landscaping scheme will be based upon those plans. So there will be no radical change.
I do apologise, I'm not 100% sure of the procedure, but my understanding is that we need, if this appeal is allowed, then the detailed plans would be submitted and there is an opportunity for discussion, and if the local planning authority do want change, say to species, that's their opportunity for achieving that.
But in terms of road layout, building, structure and scale, that is all fixed.
That's my understanding, that there wouldn't be any changes to, for example, road layout. I'm not sure how architectural conditions work, but from the external landscape, one could reasonably expect the layouts to, well, I suppose if there was something that cropped up in terms of a request from the local planning authority, well, I'd like you to move this road sort of 2 meters to the left, that sort of thing. I don't know. I
don't think that's how it would operate. I think I should ask the planner that. I think I can tell you that it's going to be, the road is going to stay where it is on the plan, sure. And that's the basis on which the inspector determines this application.
All right.
Other points of agreement, please. Miss Oxley's proof, para 3.20. Sorry, that's my fault. Trying to drag you into other areas, Mr. Kirkpatrick. If I do that again, please tell me off, and I'm sure I'll ask the right person. Do you have table 1?
I do.
So we can see there we've agreed value, a difference on susceptibility, agree sensitivity, major difference being magnitude of effect and the overall effect.
Yes.
Now, do you have Glivia to hand? It is a core document if needed, and it's E11. Now, Mr. Village uses a slightly nicer sounding Glavia, which I think I might adopt now as well, actually. So page 71 of Glavia. Is the flow chart that you'll be familiar with in terms of judging landscape effects.
Yes.
And it is about the sensitivity assessment. So we see in the boxes on the left, sensitivity is a function of assessing value and susceptibility.
Yes.
You see that in the flow chart yet? And Ms. Oxley arrives at medium sensitivity from a medium value and a medium susceptibility, and you arrive at a medium sensitivity from a medium value and a low susceptibility. I'm just curious, quite really, as to where the difference is between you and Ms. Oxley on that.
I'm not 100% sure. I can only really comment on why I think it's a low susceptibility. And that relates to the fact that in terms of the visibility, in terms of the potential effects on the local landscape character area, it is a very well contained, remarkably well contained site, and just apologies, getting out the plan. And it relates to the methodology that I have,
which is in your appendices.
Which is in my appendices, and I understand that broadly that Ms. Oxley was supportive and indeed was using that. So if we go to that Appendix E.
Yes.
What is page? We're on page 8 of Appendix E. I suppose the difference is, in terms of the definition, a medium definition being a prominent change of more limited scale, i.e. not large scale and not large in scale and extent, including loss of some key landscape characteristics or elements, or the addition of some new features or elements that would potentially change landscape character. As opposed to the low magnitude of change, it's a noticeable change affecting small areas of landscape character where the proposed scheme would not quite fit into the landform and scale of the landscape, or would add new features or elements of limiting characterizing influence.
Yes.
Clearly, I've judged that the effects, landscape effects, are such that it's more appropriate to assign a low-level change, and that's to do with the fitting to the landform and scale, and it goes back to an integration point where it's sitting at a low level in the landscape.
Yes.
Surrounded by
we'll definitely get them.
Woodlands, etc., and the scale is right insofar as the development. I know we need to dissect this, but if we can start with that lower area, but the building and the car park and the memorial gardens, they sit quite comfortably in the landform and the vegetation context, and it is that Staines Hill and Staines Plantation is the plantation that is the stronger, larger element and larger scale component. So it fits quite nicely. Is it limiting characterizing influence? Yes, I believe so, because actually it's where, hence my comment about where it's visible from. The views from Green Lane are basically, for the most part, as we will see this on site, but from most parts of Green Lane, you're just looking over the development there. It's a long distance view. The views from, I've looked at, and you'll have seen my comments about views from the west and the south. So I just felt it fitted that category best, and that is at the end of the day, I do consider it to be a low magnitude of landscape change.
Okay, I mean, I did ask about susceptibility, and you gave me an answer about magnitude.
Oh, apologies, I thought.
No, please don't worry, because I think you in an odd way we've ended up where we needed to be anyway. So when we go to look at landscape character, which we will do, the inspector needs to have in her mind medium and low, as you've highlighted there, in terms of magnitude of change, and focus on the effect on landscape characteristics or elements. That's the focus of the difference between medium and low there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, you will also need to think about the effect of the change to the landscape brought about by the use of the land. That's a key part of the assessment as well.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So physical development and use of land. And when we want to look, and we'll get there in a moment, when we want to look at your proof in terms of the effect on landscape, it's where you went with Mr. Village, and it's your section 8.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. Greenbelt openness generally, then, please. Now we've set the boundaries of what it is we're to be discussing. Let's look at some of them in more detail. Greenbelt openness generally. So the requirements of openness are a matter of judgment. Mm-hmm. We've agreed that it's got a spatial and a visual element. Given that the spatial element involves an absence of built form, are you able to agree that there is, by the introduction of a building into an otherwise undeveloped field, there is harm to the greenbelt openness in terms of the spatial element of it?
Yes.
So there is harm to the spatial element of openness.
It's that's part of the definitional harm, I believe it's called.
And then when we're looking at the visual impact on openness, that's where we have the crossover with the landscape and visual assessment.
It is where we have the crossover, but there are other factors.
If we could look, please, in your appendices at photo C.
Yes.
Which is the view from Green Lane looking across the site.
Yes.
And if we go up actually as well to photo B and photos A, it is the openness is a key characteristic of those views across the site.
Yes, that's correct. It's and I think the word across the site is quite right. Because, for example, in A, you're looking above. The view is dominated by the arable field in the foreground, but Stainhill Plantation sitting at relatively low level.
And again, no photo montages, so the inspector will need to form her own view as she goes on her site visit of what can and can't be seen of the site from here. If I could look at photo I and J, please.
Yes.
Which shows or purports to show where the views towards the access. Well, J would show a view towards the access, wouldn't it?
Yes, I believe they both do.
Nothing is marked on your photographs to show where that access will be taken, is it?
No, it's not.
And there's nothing marked on your photographs to show how much of the hedgerow will be removed, is there?
No.
Although it will be 30 metres of hedgerow in total.
I think it's more than that, actually.
How much hedgerow will be removed?
I think it's approximately 180 metres.
180 metres of hedgerow. And with the removal of the hedgerow, there will be views into that site, which will perhaps be opened up that perhaps otherwise would not be.
I think it's a when you say views into the site, I think careful consideration needs to be given over precisely what would be seen. Certainly in neither of these views will you see the building or the car park or the lower parts of the site.
Sorry, Mr. Kirkpatrick, sorry.
Yes, sorry. And for the most part, the access road, internal access road will not be visible either. You will get from some sections of lane, you will have visibility, but not from all.
Have you provided a photograph or any evidence to assist the inspector in visualising what views will be opened up by the removal of 180 metres of established hedgerow?
No, I haven't.
No.
What will I think that's obviously the inspector will look at that at some detail at her site visit and come to her judgment, but certainly the removal of the hedgerow will open up those long distance views across the valley. And there will, as I said, be some views from some sections of hedgerow where you see the internal access road at its upper point.
And when the inspector comes to consider impact on the visual element of openness of the green belt, she should consider what can be seen through this new access, over the access road, over the buildings and car parks, etc., and out onto the other out to the other areas of the green belt.
Absolutely.
And she'll have to do that on her own because you've not provided any assistance to her.
I've not provided any assistance to her, but I think at the accompanied site visit, all parties, I'm sure, will come up to a joint view over what is visible and what is not visible.
In your paragraph 7.1.13, so we're in the section on the effect on the visual openness of the green belt.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where you talk about the appeal scheme would enable public access onto that part of the Greenbelt to the south of Green Lane for the first time. And I'm not disputing whether or not the public could go onto this site or not, but it's about whether the public, other than those attending cremations, would go onto this site or not. And I don't think you're suggesting, are you, that this will become some form of community space accessed by those not attending cremations?
I'm not suggesting it would become a community space. Of course, it's a little unknown how the crematoria develop from that point of view, but I think it's entirely reasonable to consider that some individuals in the wider community, perhaps when they've parked at Brodsworth Community Woodland and want to walk further, might want to go down, if they're aware that it is open to the public, they might want to go down the access road to the Memorial Gardens. As I've said in my proof, I think anticipate it would be a highly attractive, tranquil space. So the potential is there. Of course, the test would come in the course of time if the crematorium was approved and developed.
So just to be absolutely clear, this is people on foot choosing to access the site down the access road, because there's no footpath provided, is there?
There is not, no. I think by a bicycle, foot or car is, I think, what I said.
Right. And so they would then be accessing this piece of the Greenbelt down an asphalt drive, looking towards a building, a car park for 109 spaces, a chimney.
Yes, they would also be looking towards. I think the development is crematorium grounds are developed. They are generally, a lot of time and thought is given by Dignity to the development of their grounds. They are attractive spaces because the people they want people to feel comfortable. There's almost a sort of, I don't know, a visitor experience that comes with it, where the spaces that are designed, they're for contemplation and mourning, and they are, as I say, quite attractive, well-designed spaces where people are comfortable in visiting. There's also, I think, there's a strong ecological component to this particular development. And as you walk down the tarmac access road, you've got you have wildflower meadow on either side. You've got native hedgerows and trees, and some of those are going to be apple trees and with blossom and so on. So I think it is attractive, and I can imagine people cycling down Green Lane who stop and may come into the site to see what it is. And if some people enjoy that experience, that no doubt they'll come back again. But you're right to say that there's no public footpath there, and I've never seen anyone walking along there. But it would have to be most likely people parked at the Community Woodland car park and walking up who approach that way.
Thank you. You go on at 7.1.15. Sorry, just before we do go into that, there's no footpath through the site. There's also no footpath along Green Lane, is there? It's just a green verge.
Absolutely, you're correct. Yes.
And if I remember rightly, and tell me if I'm taking you out of your area, there's no nearby bus stop either.
I believe there's a bus stop
in Canada,
close to Long Plantation.
Okay. Thank you. 7.1.15, you say this part of the Greenbelt has some capacity in visibility terms to accommodate new built development. Now, I know that might be your view, so I don't want you just to give me your view again, because I think the inspector's got that. Yeah. You're not relying on any other independent assessment to support your view here, are you? you make no reference to one.
No, it's my view.
Just your view. Okay.
I suppose there is. I'd need to go back to the various documents that were prepared for the capacity studies, and without going there immediately, I think the fact that the capacity for, say, residential was defined as low to none. I don't think it excludes everything. So it's, to my mind, it follows that if there is some capacity for large-scale buildings, such as an industrial shed or X numbers of houses that very often are built at quite high density, then it is likely that there is capacity by implication for a new crematorium. But that first sentence was my view.
Yes, I mean, we will get onto the assessments in the 2007 and 2010 assessments, but they were not assessments in terms of greenbelt visual openness, were they? They were landscape assessments.
They were landscape assessments, absolutely.
Looking at landscape character.
And views, yes.
Thank you. Right. The baseline position in landscape character terms, please. You say in your 2.8.1,
yes,
and I think there's broad agreement on this. I think certainly Mr. Taylor seemed to suggest so, and I think Ms. Oxley did as well in her evidence and in response to Mr. Village, that the site, and you say here that the site lies within LLCA 1, and it exhibits many of the key characteristics of LCA C2 Cadby to Adwick limestone plateau. So the key characteristics that the inspector needs to be thinking of are, I hope you agree, the smoothly rolling landform that you mentioned there.
yes.
That it rises from east to west. Yes.
Rises from southwest to northeast.
Southwest to northeast on this site. That there are large-scale arable fields.
Yes.
And that is the fields are open but bounded by established hedges, trimmed hawthorn hedges, it says.
Yes, but I think the 2007 capacity study just makes the point, well, hedgerows often with gaps or missing altogether from field boundaries.
Yes. So when the inspector comes to look and assess the magnitude of the change, just reminding ourselves as we went through earlier, she needs to consider the impact on the scale and extent, including loss of some key landscape characteristics or elements, and medium being a noticeable change of more limited scale of key landscape characteristics, and your level being at low, noticeable change affecting small areas of landscape character where it would not quite fit into the landform. So the question for the inspector is, how does this development impact upon the smoothly rolling landform, the large-scale arable field, and the hedges?
Yes, I think it's important to just look at all the key.
Well, let's just do yes or no to that one, and then we can go into more detail.
Yes, absolutely. No, my apologies. The other key characteristics is in terms of sporadic built development, in terms of, as identified, sparsely scattered farmsteads with traditional stone built nucleated settlements concentrated in the west. Some modern influences, including motorway, historic parklands with mature trees and pasture, tree cover evident throughout the areas with parkland trees, small blocks of trees in farmland and wooded strips along roads, good access, main roads and minor roads, very rural and tranquil in some areas. In some locations, there's an open field with extensive views to the east and west. So it's in the round, all those characteristics.
Yes, but we're talking about the specific characteristics which this particular site and surrounding context exhibits.
Yes,
and those are those that you've listed there. And then you describe, I have to say, describe in poetic prose almost, at 4.5.2.
Well, I think landscape is
maybe I spent too much time with my 7-year-old daughter watching Disney films, when I could kind of see a Disney princess with a bird landing on her shoulder and having a conversation with her. But you describe it there, the sense of place being remoteness, being peaceful, calm and relaxing, tranquility, and the gently undulating landform, again being characteristics which this inspector needs to have in her mind when she decides upon the effect of this development.
Yes, but it's in addition to that, it's the surrounding context as well. But yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the effects, we can agree that there will be a permanent change.
For the operational effects, yes. Obviously, the
and that they will,
effects are temporary.
And they will be irreversible.
I would consider them to be so.
Yes, good. Could we go please to F9, which is the 2007 Landscape Character and Capacity Assessment. And it's page, please, 50. It starts on page 54 of 199 as marked on the page, or electronically 110 of 268.
Okay.
You have that?
I do.
So this is the assessment of the Cadby to Adwick limestone plateau. And it provides details on potential mitigation, and there's over at page 57 of 199. It looks at landscape capacity for housing development. You see that?
Apologies. Could you give me the page number again?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it says in the bottom right-hand corner of the actual page, page 57 of 199. Electronically, it's page 113 of 268.
Okay, got you. I have that now.
So there's a broad landscape capacity for housing development.
Yes.
You see that, which you've addressed to some extent in your proof. And then if we scroll slightly further down, there is on page 60 of 199, the landscape capacity for strategic employment. You have that.
Yes.
Now, what we don't have is a landscape character and capacity study that talks about crematoria in this LCA, do we? So we've got to do as best we can from the housing and the strategic employment assessment.
Yes.
But if we were to look for easier comparisons, would you agree with me that it is slightly easier to make a comparison with strategic employment, perhaps not in terms of scale of the individual buildings, because this isn't the size of a large warehouse, for example, but in terms of when one looks at siting, number of buildings, it's easier to compare it with strategic employment than with housing, where of course you've got more densely located and numerous buildings.
I think one's got to be very careful indeed about making any comparison with either housing or strategic employment. Strategic employment, you've got very large scale tall sheds potentially. There's mention in this document of the requirements for flood lighting and so and quite extensive areas of hard standing for parking of lorries and so on.
So we have to exhibit caution. You spend quite a bit of time in your brief and in your evidence in chief, though, looking at the mitigation measures here. So you must agree that there is some value in making that assessment. I
think there is value in considering what is judged in the documents, particularly with regard to mitigation measures, because very often the mitigation measures for built development are useful indicators, or they can be appropriate for different types of development. But it's very difficult to say. Depends on the measure.
And what's provided here? So it's provided for two types of development that this is not. So that's already one health warning. The second health warning, of course, is that these are mitigation measures. What they don't say is if you meet all of these, you will cause no harm.
I need to look at where it says mitigation measures.
So if you look, so I'm looking at the moment at the strategic employment site, broad landscape capacity for strategic employment, and it says the potential for mitigation is considered to be limited, and in addition, the development guidance detailed in part 3 of this document, it could be achieved by the following. So it's giving guidance on how you seek to mitigate strategic employment development.
It is giving such guidance, yes.
But what it's not saying is, and it's to say, well, let's for completeness, let's just go and check the housing development as well. You get the same if you scroll back to page 57 of 199. You get the same introductory sentence before the bullet points. The potential for mitigation is considered moderate, and in addition to the development guidance detailed in part 3 of this document, it could be achieved by the following, and then the guidance is in bullet point form.
I know what you're saying. Yes.
Yes. So first health warning was it doesn't deal with our type of development. Second health warning is what it's not saying is if you achieve these mitigation measures, you will cause no harm to this landscape.
I don't believe it makes such a statement. No.
No. Okay. So if we could look, please, at the strategic employment mitigation, please. Well, sorry, ma'am, I'm just conscious of time, and it's 10 to 5. We're getting into the last bit of cross-examination on the landscape effects. I think it probably will take me 30 to 40 minutes, and then of course there's re-examination. Oh, sorry, no, there's not re-examination. Then there's Mr. Barrett. If Mr. Kirkpatrick is happy to break over the evening, I would, similar to Mr. Village earlier today, use this evening to trim any fat off, and come back with less time, I imagine, to be spent, certainly rather than more time, tomorrow morning. But now would be a sensible time to break if we were to.
Okay, that's noted. Thank you, Mr. Robson. We've only really got 10 minutes anyway, so we're not losing a significant amount of time, and hopefully you can make that up tomorrow anyway, a more trimmed cross-examination. Okay, just to note, with regards to tomorrow, which is Thursday, I believe, it's been a long week, I will need to leave at 4:45. because I have my daughter's parents' evening. She'd never forgive me if I missed it, although my son would be quite pleased, to be fair. So yes, that's very much a cut-off point. So just to bear that in mind. And tomorrow, obviously, Mr. Obbs can finish cross-examination, Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mr. Barrett. You can commence your cross-examination, and there may be questions from interested parties, and also my questions before re-examination. We have made up a bit of time today, so thank you for your efforts in that. Mr. Robson, you did say that you may have an update for me in terms of the recording from yesterday. Has that come through yet?
Ma'am, everything has been quiet from the council, which makes me think that they still don't have IT. I will have to call once we finish today, ma'am, and update you tomorrow. Apologies for that. I think there are still IT troubles.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm just very conscious of the the public interest in the proposal. Mr. Village.
Ma'am, yes, you've got my sympathy about the parents' evening. I was always encouraged not to go. We're working hard to deal with Mr. Mitchell's late evidence, and I've got going to have a consultation tomorrow morning with my clients to finalise how we're going to deal with that. So I'm going to ask if you would give us, please, another half an hour in the morning and start at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
And Mr. Village, do you think that would save us time in the longer run? Just very conscious of our tight timetable.
I'm very conscious of that. It depends how I decide to deal with it. I mean, if we put in a written rebuttal, then probably it would. I'm unwilling to promise that we'll save half an hour. I hope we will, but I can't guarantee it.
Okay, well, I do appreciate, Mr. Village, that you and your team are dealing with that evidence coming in pretty late in the day, so I'm willing to give some leeway on that if that's agreeable to the other parties.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
And I would urge, given that obviously we're going to have an earlier finish as well tomorrow, that we do try and sort of trim the cross-examination time. That would be very useful.
Sorry, ma'am, if I could make just one request, please, in terms of how Mr. Village chooses to deal with Mr. Mitchell's evidence. If there is to be a written rebuttal, when do you think we might be able to see that?
Mr. Village?
Well, I think Mr. Robson is in danger of skating on very thin ice here. It will be presented probably prior to his witness giving evidence, but I can't promise that even. So it depends really how when we can produce it, subject to my comments. But frankly, and this is just my very friendly suggestion from one member of the bar to another, I wouldn't really press that point, Mr. Robson.
Mr. Village, I really wasn't pressing it, and I'm fully aware of the how thin the ice is underneath me. But I thought I could ask in terms of assisting the preparation that we would have to do as well. I appreciate the response. Thank you, Mr. Village.
And there is potential, obviously, depending if we keep on track, for Mr. Mitchell to give evidence in chief tomorrow afternoon. So just bear that in mind, and it would obviously assist myself also to have your rebuttal, Mr. Village, by then. Yeah. So well, I'm sure it will help to focus minds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm rather hoping that we will actually start the cross-examination of Mr. Mitchell tomorrow, and then I can. It may be that we we have a hangover again, but Mr. Robson's given us a hangover today.
Yes, I think it's almost inevitable that there will be a hangover. So, right. Are there any other procedural points? Then we're agreed it will be starting 10 o'clock tomorrow. Have I missed any other points anyone would like to raise?
No, thank you, ma'am.
No. And Mr. Village, if your team can progress the site visit notes, I think given the discussions we've had, I suspect it might be worth waiting till the conclusion of evidence on landscape, because there have been quite a few things raised during the discussion, and I'm keeping a note of things I'd like to see as well. So so tomorrow, Friday, would be helpful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think we responded to the council, but obviously their IT issues are getting the better of them. And secondly, could I just ask, please, Mr. Kirkpatrick, to keep his WhatsApp turned off or mute us or do whatever it is that means he doesn't look at any WhatsApp traffic going on tonight, please.
No, I don't even have WhatsApp. I couldn't download the newest version, so radio silence.
Oh, okay, well, I didn't notice it. I wondered why you weren't responding to my questions the other day, but anyway, good. Okay.
That makes things somewhat easier, Mr. Kirkpatrick. Okay, well, thank you for all of your contributions today, and I shall adjourn the inquiry until tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.